just briefly review the agenda for today. I'm going to start with the science part of this conversation, and then we'll deal a little more with the art aspects a little later on. First, I want to talk about metrics as a process. I think there's many examples I've seen where measures get put in place without an appropriate amount of forethought about what the goals of the measures are. And I also frequently see that measures get put in place, but little is done to actually look at those measures, do some analysis, take actions, and then monitor how progress is unfolding. So we're going to talk quite a bit about the process aspect of this. I think that's the scientific cornerstone of effective use of measurement, and that really is the cart that comes before the horse, or the horse that comes before the cart, I should say. I want to talk a little bit about quantitative thinking. I'm going to be talking a little bit about statistics, but this is not going to be your usual introduction to statistics. Not like a root canal. We're going to be talking about quantitative thinking, which can use statistics, but we don't need to get into a lot of formulas and that sort of thing. So this will be painless. And then the second part of the presentation, I want to talk about some key metrics. And I moved that deliberately to the second place because I think I often get the question, what should we measure? And unfortunately, that's not a good question to start with. We want to think first about why and how we're going to use measures before we worry specifically about what the right measures are. Nonetheless, in the second part, I'm going to talk about what I think are some of the key measures. We'll be talking about cost of quality, which maybe you're familiar with or maybe not. It isn't as widely used as it probably should be. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the big four software development metrics: quality, size, effort, and duration. You'll notice that I've italicized effort and duration, and my reason for doing that is that we're really not going to talk much about that. I think those measures are relatively self-explanatory. We're going to spend more time on quality and on size. And before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about productivity, what it means, what the pitfalls are in measuring productivity. A lot of people seem to feel measuring productivity is sort of a holy grail, and I think we need to go into that if we're going to do it with our eyes wide open about what the pitfalls and issues are. So we're going to spend a bit of time on that. And of course, other key metrics relate to service level agreements, maybe more in the context of ITIL more commonly than in software development. But cycle time and defect rates are important. We are going to talk a little bit about defect rates. We're really not going to have time to talk about cycle time today. And then there'll be time at the end for questions and answers. So let's just move right into this. Metrics as a process, I think it's fair to say that the Six Sigma DMAIC approach is by far the most successful process model for using metrics and for improving outcomes. It's almost universally used in manufacturing. Virtually every large company any place in the world has used this method for improving manufacturing processes. It's also very widely used in what's become known as transactional processes. That would be things like banking and insurance and healthcare and many other areas. And it's also been used with good success in IT and software development. Not as widely used. The take-up there has not been as great. I still hold out some hope that one of these days it will become as popular in the software and IT world as it has been in other areas. And kind of the central tenet, or I think you can sort of sum up what Six Sigma is all about in this very simple, deceptively simple little equation here: y equals a function of a series of x's, where y is intended to represent an outcome. It's a dependent variable. It's typically not something we can directly control. So we probably all recognize you can't turn a dial and improve productivity or cycle time, but there are factors that can be identified, we call those x's, that determine any kind of an outcome, whether it's productivity or cycle time or whatever else. And these are the independent variables, and there are things that we can control. Of course, it isn't always completely obvious what the right things are to control, and part of what this DMAIC process is all about, it provides us a mechanism to find out what X's are significant and which ones have the most influence on the outcomes. So one way of understanding what this DMAIC process is, and DMAIC of course stands for define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. One way to understand what this is, it's a process for finding out what the significant X's are and then introducing controls that will manage those to the desired levels necessary to achieve the outcomes we're interested in. So we talk about this as a sequential process. Of course, it isn't entirely really completely sequential. That's a convenient way to learn it and a convenient way to think about it. But like many processes, there are iterations. When you're doing creative kinds of things like developing software, there's obviously going to be iterations, even if you think about it as a sequential process. It isn't literally sequential, and that's certainly the case with process improvement too. It's not a completely linear, one step follows the next kind of a process. So in the define phase, the objective is to identify what are those significant whys, what are the outcomes we're trying to control. Unfortunately, all the measurement programs get started without giving enough thought to why are we doing this, what are the outcomes we're trying to influence. In the measure phase, the objective is to identify a set of potential X's, and often that involves brainstorming. What might be the factors that drive the outcome? And then in the analyze phase, the objective is to find out which X's actually do contribute to the outcome and which of those are the most significant. Obviously, as a practical matter, we can't control an enormous number of variables very readily. I mean, it's not impossible, but much more difficult if we're going to have very many things we want to influence. So part of the intent of this process is to find out which of these factors are exerting the most influence over the outcome and focus on a small number of them. Sort of the Pareto principle idea, where frequently 80% of the outcome is determined by 20% of the factors. So we want to find out what those 20% are and focus our attention on working on those. In the improve phase, we focus on those critical few. So we figure out, okay, if there are 2 or 3 things that are most influential in determining the outcome, we want to focus our attention on controlling those, moving those to levels necessary to achieve the targets that we've established for the whys. And then, of course, the control process is all about monitoring and sustaining the results. Like many processes tend to decay if we don't keep an eye on them. So we might make an improvement, get some initial improvement in results, but if we don't continue to pay attention to controlling the significant factors, it's very likely that over time they will deteriorate. So that's what control is all about, is making sure we sustain the performance improvement that we initially realize. So I want to talk just a little bit about statistics, and again, this picture here is meant to be a little bit of a humorous notion here. This is a painting called The Scream, and I don't know about what your experience was, but I remember when I took my first statistics course, I wanted to scream. I got inundated with a bunch of formulas that was quite confusing and not evident why the formulas were being taught, what their significance was. So